Hello there, it's Jamie Moore here. You're very welcome to the That's What I Call Sport on 98 FM. We're here every Sunday between 9am and 10am. And as you can see, we're not actually in our studio today, we're out in Howth for two reasons. One, because I live here, and two, because this man, Shane Carthy, has a very important story about a walk he took here with his sister a few years ago. One we'll hear more detail in a few minutes. So I'm Shane, of course, plays for Naomh Marnogue and also a former Dublin All-Ireland winner as well. Shane, welcome to 98 FM. How are you?
Thank you very much, I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. So Shane wrote a blog just before Christmas, and the headline of the blog was, "I'm no longer surviving, I'm living." Mm-hmm. Tell me more.
Yes, so essentially I had said to myself, I've been doing talks the last kind of 3-4 years around my whole story, and I just wanted to get my message out there on a bigger scale. As I said, I've done talks before, but that's very limited in terms of it's at a certain time, certain date, at a certain place. So I just want to get my message out there that people can relate to this at 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the day. So that was my whole thing of wanting to get it on a bigger scale, and thankfully it looks like it has. Yeah,
and if people haven't read the blog, we're going to tweet it on at 98 FM at the moment as well, but we're going to talk through exactly what is in it, and it's all about depression and being a really good sports person from your days in primary school through secondary school, through winning the All-Ireland with the Dubs, and through all of that period, or some of it anyway, you were really struggling with mental health issues and depression. Bring me to the middle of fifth year when the first signs came, because you'd been in primary school, you were Sports Boy of the Year 4 years in a row, you were a top school captain as well, you were playing for the Dubs minors, but things weren't right.
They weren't, and as you said, it was very much so from early on. I was lucky enough to be relatively talented at anything I threw my hand at, and in particular Gaelic football was my main focus. Come fifth year, I was in second year at Dublin minor, and coinciding with that was actually a period in my life where it began what I didn't know at the time was depression. And as you said, it was middle of fifth year when I began to get these low moods. They were quite sporadic in terms of I maybe had a bad day, didn't feel great once, twice a month, but these feelings and emotions that I was getting was gradually becoming worse. And it began a 2-year period of me just kind of bottling it up, and that's how it all began. Yeah,
you spoke about a low feeling once or twice a month, and at the time, you were, as we said, at the top of your game in terms of becoming, a Dublin footballer, which was always your dream. But those low feelings once or twice a month became more and more and more, and you didn't tell anybody.
I didn't tell anybody, and the reason being, at the very start, I was so naive in thinking that there was hormonal changes going on in my body. I didn't take much notice of it. As I said at the beginning, it was very sporadic. It was once, twice a month. But as the days and weeks and months passed, these feelings got a lot worse, and I began to feel these more often. And I just felt like my coping mechanism, as I've spoken about, was football. And because I was so busy with it, that was a kind of a way out, or a coping mechanism for me each day to kind of get through, and in particular, a bad day that I may have had once or twice. So. That period of my life was hugely difficult from the very beginning, but I always had sport there as a coping mechanism. But unfortunately, as the time went on, my thoughts and my emotions were getting gradually worse, and I just felt like I couldn't speak to anyone. I didn't want to say it to my friends, I didn't want to say it to my family. You're referred there to many years previous in primary school that I was lucky to be up on this pedestal that I didn't like to be up on, but I was in a fortunate position that I was. I was playing for Dublin minor football at the time, and I was the only one in my area doing it at this time. And I just felt like I had I'd say a personality to kind of keep up, and this kind of poker face as I do talk about, I just felt like I had to keep that up every single day.
Yeah, talk to me about the confidence of sport that you had, and you felt that when you were playing sport, that was really the only time when your thoughts that made you sad were gone. And people often speak about the release and whatever of being a sports person, whether you be a cyclist or a football player or a boxer. Once you're in the ring or on the pitch, the rest of your thoughts are gone, and you really did use that to try and help.
Yeah, massively, and from very, very early on, even to the latter stages of those 2 years where I was going through it, was whether it was training, a match, my own personal training that I was doing, every single time I went out there, I got that, as you refer to, the endorphins and that kind of good feeling that you get post-exercise, and I relied on that so much so that it was the only coping mechanism that I had at that stage.
Yeah, and you mentioned you had the poker face, and also in the blog you say the mask, and that you were trying to keep up appearances, and to everybody outside, watching you playing sport and watching you doing so well and watching you get call-ups for the minors, 21s and then the senior team. Nobody kind of knew anything about that. How did you handle that period when you felt you had to put on a mask in public, and then in private it was a totally different story?
Yeah, it was a difficult period. It wasn't easy to do, but as I keep on referring to, sport was there for me, and I always relied on that. For those 2 years that I kind of went through a difficult period, it was very easy for me to put up that mask and say everything was okay, that's fine, and I was just looking forward to the next session, the next match, whatever it may be. And I always just I was essentially acting for 2 years to everyone, from my close family to my close friends to anyone outside, and I just kept on going on that trend, and it wasn't healthy for me. It's never healthy for anyone to do that, and I just felt like at that time I could not come out with what exactly was going on with me.
So if we go to 2013, you get your first call up by Jim Gavin to the Dubs, and the Dubs are such a fantastic team, and it's always been your dream to be called up by the Dubs. You make your debut, you're involved in the squad that wins the All-Ireland in 2013, and 18 months into that journey of being a senior Dub, you're suicidal. Yes, yeah, and that's maybe a funny thing for people to kind of think, 18 months into my journey and I win All Ireland, and I'm feeling suicidal, as you say. It was say a week after winning the All Ireland, straight back down to earth. I was having these thoughts of ending my life. I never had a particular plan in mind, but these thoughts never left me. They never went too far away from me, and it was a hugely scary feeling. And that's when I coming up to that kind of January was when I start beginning to have that conversation with myself. I was like, I have to speak up here. I have to, I didn't want to do what I was thinking, but I couldn't get away from those thoughts. So at that time you're thinking, right, I need to speak up, I need to talk, and you're coming home from an away game, it's late at night, you arrive into the family kitchen and your family are still awake, which maybe at that time of night was uncharacteristic of them. Yeah. And you would maybe build yourself up to say something, but you couldn't because something really bad had happened. Exactly, and as you say, it was that evening I was playing an under-21s match versus Cork, and as my mum and dad did, and still do to this day, travel right around the country to any game it is, whether it's college, school, or school football as it once was then, and inter-county as well. They went to every single match, and I travelled back in a bus, and in the middle of that time, my mum coming back from Cork with my father at the time, I received a phone call to say that her dad had passed away, my granddad had passed away. And as he said, I was met with my sister and my mum and dad in the kitchen at 1 o'clock in the morning, which straight away was alarm bells ringing for me. I was wondering why they were still up, because I was a bit after them after the match. And they just met me with the news that my granddad had passed away. And such was the feeling of numbness and lack of emotion that I could attach to anything at all. I simply acknowledged it. I said, I'm sorry to hear, and I just left the room. And that was, I guess, the first warning sign for my mum and dad and my family in general, that something wasn't quite right. They began to see cracks from such a piece of devastating news. For me to acknowledge it and just say I'm sorry to hear that and leave the kitchen was a strange reaction, to say the least. Yeah, this was in January 2014. Yeah. So you go to the funeral and you continue to feel bad, and then 6 weeks later your granny dies. So your mum has lost her two parents in 6 weeks, and I think that there's a really poignant part of the blog where you say, how could I say anything when my mum must be feeling 10 times worse because she's lost both her parents, and again, you couldn't say anything about what you were really feeling because another close family member in your family had died. Exactly, and just bringing you back to that January, I had conversations, as I said, with myself to kind of bring it up with my mum and dad, and unfortunately, as I said, my granddad had passed away. A couple of weeks I'd come and gone after the funeral, and I began to have that conversation again in my head. It's like, I need to speak up. And as I said, my granny had unfortunately passed away. So exactly, I just felt like I was going to be an added burden to an already, decimated family, and especially my mum, to kind of, I felt like whatever I was going through at that time can't even relate to what she was going through. So I put it off, and as I did for those previous 2 years, put up that poker face and mask and just kept on going along with sport as it was, as I say, my coping mechanism at the time. You're on there, That's What I Call Sport on 98 FM. It's Jamie Moore here on Sunday with Shane Carthy speaking about his fantastic blog, which you can read right now on at 98 FM on Twitter. And if you can't read it, he's telling us here on video, and also obviously listening on the radio as well. The reason we're in Howth is because around this time when Shane was feeling very low, he came out here for a walk with his sister on the morning of Leinster semi-final, under 21 semi-final? Leinster final. Leinster final, okay, so he was here and he was feeling bad in the morning, decided he had to come for a walk with his sister. Did the Howth Cliff Walk, which is a fantastic walk, got some fresh air in the lungs. You went on the walk for an hour, but you said about 5 words, but you still felt listening to your sister would help. You thought of ringing the 21's manager, Desi Farrell, to say you couldn't play.
Yeah.
You didn't. You played, you won, you were man of the match, but you feel that this walk was kind of the start of some sort of knowledge from your family that something wasn't right.
Exactly. And I'll just bring you back to that, even that morning, how it all transpired, bringing or my sister bringing me out to begin that walk. Was my mum met me in the sitting room with the bowl of porridge at the time, because obviously 19 years of age I couldn't make porridge apparently, and she met me in a flood of tears. As to why I was in a flood of tears, I don't know. She'd asked me what was up with me, and all through even the previous 2 years, I couldn't make sense of why I was feeling this way. I was frustrated at myself that I couldn't convey what exactly was going through my head at the time. I just couldn't control these emotions that were ever worsening at this stage. So she decided to take upon herself to text my middle sister, married as they said, and she just said, "Listen, we'll get him out. We'll get him a bit of fresh air." And that began the Howth cliff walk that was that day, as you do before Leinster finally go out on a Howth cliff walk, so.
Don't tell the manager.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the thing, my sister was absolutely fantastic, she knew she just needed to kind of get me out and break that kind of trend that I was going through, need to get out of the house and a bit of fresh air. Probably not the most ideal thing from a physical standpoint, but from a mental side, it was just to kind of get me out of the house and break that mould. As I said, I spoke very little, but it was something that at least got me away from my thoughts for an hour and a half, whatever it may be. But then these thoughts start bundling back into my head when we came back into the car. And as I said, I started to begin to have the conversation: will I ring Desi? I can't do this. I can't face playing in front of a packed crowd in Portlaoise in a Leinster final. So, and even at that stage, that was the first time that I had, as I said, sport was a huge coping mechanism for me, and that was the first time that I'd neglected it. I said, listen, this isn't even working for me. I need to get help. And for whatever reason, to this day, I don't know, I never carried through with that phone call. And as I said, the rest was history. Went on to win the game and man the match, and to this day, I still don't know how I've done it.
Yeah, one big part of most people's lives is music, and I love music, but people who are very happy listen to music, but also people who are sad listen to music and listen to sad music. And I have a couple of pals myself who've gone through stuff, and I always used to say to them, don't listen to sad music because it only makes your mood worse. And they would continue to, they might put up an Instagram story of some sort of a sad song, and I'd immediately reply going, turn that off and whatever. And music is a part of this day, because you were on the bus on the way to the match, and you said you didn't like the environment of a team bus, which I found strange, because most sports people love being in the environment of travelling to a big game and that anticipation. But you'd made a playlist, you put your hood up, and you hoped that the music would take you out of that mood. And I just found that really interesting, that you just put the headphones on and you had your playlist ready to go.
Yeah, and even at that, I didn't think twice about how I looked on a bus, because a lot of people do that. A lot of people stick their headphones on and stick their hood up and are getting into the mode of the game. And for me, it was a playlist that I had made. I'm sure, as you just said there, I refer to a lot of songs like that brought me back to happy places, the happy moments that I had with my family, friends, a certain holiday that I went on. So I collated this playlist and just stuck it on and just hoped that it would bring me to a better place than where I really was in my head.
So this brings us to a fantastic quote, and if you're any sports person and you're a sports player and you played at the top level, the quote reads, "I was wishing every play would last forever." And that was when Shane was on the pitch winning the Leinster final for the Dubs as the man of the match as well. But he didn't hang around too long for the celebrations. You went home in the parents' car, and shortly after that, a trip to Stockholm to visit your oldest sister. Yeah. Is it Michelle?
Michelle, yeah.
And that was the first time when you told someone of your suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, and even at that, the reason being that I went over to Stockholm was, as you said, my oldest sister Michelle. I confided in her in maybe a few more things than I did with my other two sisters, and the whole thing was my mum was hoping that, something, whatever I was apparently hiding, I would convey what exactly was going on for me. Again, it didn't transpire. I did let her know that I was having thoughts of ending my life, and obviously that's a hugely difficult thing for anyone to hear, and especially my sister being so far away that she felt hopeless, that she wanted to help me, but I couldn't explain to her what was going on for me. So she had little to no hope to, she could be there for me, but apart from that she couldn't do much. So that trip was, null and void in terms of trying to make any progression as to an ever worsening situation.
Yeah, and at that time, your parents wouldn't allow you to drive anywhere on your own, and they were worried about you. And it brings us to the day where you're in your dad's car on the way to, to meet up with the team, and you have a panic attack, and you wake up in a mental hospital, effectively, which you spent 11 weeks there. Tell me about that day, and again, it's a day that will stick in your memory for a long time.
Yeah, and as I said, my dad and my mum and everyone in my family knew exactly what was going on for me at this stage. And he said he didn't want me to be driving to training, so he had brought me to DCU at the time where we were training. We'd finished the training session, had come and gone. Very little had happened. There was just a few walkthroughs and tactics for the upcoming game, and we were due to have a meeting in Castleknock Hotel. So we're travelling from DCU to Castleknock Hotel, and at this stage, very little was going through my head in terms of, as in, I was essentially staring into space. I just felt my heart rate ever heightening, and the feeling of a panic just set upon me, and I just asked my dad, could he pull over at the side of the road? And as I say, the next thing that I remember, obviously a panic attack transpired, but the next thing I remember was waking up in St Patrick's Mental Hospital, being greeted by two nurses that morning. And
you went for food, and like anyone else, and you mentioned about the movies, you expect to see people in straitjackets and people, I think you said punching walls or shouting or whatever. Yeah. But you were actually welcomed by the other people in the hospital, and it wasn't what you expected it to be. No, and that was the thing. The very first time when the nurses greeted me to tell me exactly where I was, I referred straight to that. I always refer to Shutter Island as an analogy of people in a dark, dreary room in straitjackets, as you said, headbutting the wall. But because I was so uneducated about the whole mental health service and just mental health in general, that I just began to think, this is what I'm going into, and they invited me into the breakfast room, and it was anything but. It was, as you said, greeted by some lovely patients that I'm still friends with to this day, and that was the beginning of my 11-week journey in St Patrick's Mental Hospital. And you've spoken as well about a further weight lifting off your shoulders when the manager Dessie Farrell came out publicly at a press conference before a big game to announce that you weren't going to be involved in the squad because you were depressed, and again, that was a moment that for years you tried to hide, but I'm sure when you knew that was going to come out, and when it did come out, that was a weight lifted, that now everybody knew what was happening. Yeah, exactly, and that was the thing. Dessie, I owe huge gratitude to him to where I am today, and we began to have the conversation after the first couple of weeks in hospital. I was lucky in the fact that I was doing well from an under-21 football point of view and a senior football point of view, and although I like to keep myself to myself, I then had to realise that I'm in a lucky position that a lot of people would love to be in, that maybe what I say or do from a social media or public point of view has an effect further afield. So I didn't want anyone ever experiencing what I had to go through for those 2 years. So that was the decision that myself and Dessie had made, and as you said, it became public, and hopefully still to this day, I hope I'm still striking a chord with someone to make sure they'll never be in the position that I was. Yeah, and we're going to speak now a little about the skills and the mechanisms that you use to cope, and what you do now to try and help other people as well. And I love the part where the nurse in the hospital asked, what do you want to try and help? And you said, shock, you're a sports person, I want an open field. Yeah. So they allowed you to have accompanied leave, as such, I think it was called, and you went for runs with your sisters and your parents and your headphones on and that sort of stuff as well. And you've spoken a lot about how much exercise is linked to mental well-being, and I would agree with that totally. Even as we've been out here in the last 20 minutes, we're not exercising, but we're in the fresh air, and you can see the sea, and it automatically kind of lifts you. So you want to speak a little bit about that? I know you're doing lots of talks at the moment just about if someone is feeling down, get out, even go for a walk, get some fresh air, see someone, speak to someone, and that's something that you've been doing a lot in recent times. I know you've been living in the gym with one of your good mates, Conor Pepper, as well. Yeah, he'll be delighted that you've linked in his name there. But no, it was a thing that the nurses wanted to help me, and they just asked what I needed, and as I said, it was an open field. It was something that I relied upon for the previous 2 years, and I knew it was something that helped me. I was very much in the open mindset of on trying anything and everything, but I knew this was a solid foundation for me to begin. And I had my ups and downs, as depression inevitably is. You're never going to be on an even keel for the whole time that you're there. But I just relied upon that. And for anyone out there struggling, I found that as something that works for me. It may not work for everyone, but
there's no point in knocking it before you try it. And I always had that open mindset in terms of, I had a lot of conversations with people around the hospital, what worked for them, what didn't, and I always refer to it as my toolbox. I always refer to it as, you know, dipping into my toolbox and seeing if that works for me. You know, whether it's someone saying painting helps me, I tried that. If it didn't help, I'll just push it aside and continue on from there. But no, running was something that definitely, and still to this day, is a huge helping hand in my mental well-being.
What else is in the Shane Carthy toolbox?
I would say even the likes of this, I often go on a lot of drives, stick in, as I referred to, my music before, and just go on a drive, you know, go to some scenery or anywhere around the country for that matter, and sit there and just be by myself. You know, I was never comfortable for many years previous sitting there with my own thoughts, and now I've become comfortable in recognising what emotions are coming through in a conveyor belt kind of type fashion, that, you know, it was a hugely kind of positive thing for me to kind of go on these drives and get that kind of, you know, that positive feeling that where I have come from. So that would be another huge thing. As I said, exercise. Another thing is just sitting there having a conversation with someone. I don't have to say much. It's a lot of what they kind of say, and just the kind of good feelings that you get from, you know, having a sociable conversation with anyone and everyone, you know.
So some people's music playlists are very private, but again, if you're going on a drive, don't answer if you don't want to, but what sort of music and songs do you put on when you're feeling good or to make you feel good?
So a huge thing for me was actually at the time when I was going through a difficult time was Coldplay.
Lovely, my favourite band. Good shout.
In particular, and funny enough, a fun fact that they were actually my first ever band and concert that I've ever went to. That was back in 2016 when they played in Croke Park.
I was there too. Unbelievable.
The best. Well, I had nothing to refer to, but apparently the best gig that's been around in the last while. So Coldplay would be a huge thing for me, and Magic from Coldplay in particular. It's actually tattooed on my arm. The single album cover that they have is actually tattooed on my arm from bring me back to where I once was, that for those 3 or 4 minutes that in particular song was on, that it brought me to a happier place and a more positive place.
A total aside to this, but I'm going to make Shane jealous now. I was at a wedding last week where the bride and groom, Vinny and Orna, rented the Coldplay wristbands,
the
lights, and I was in charge of them for the first dance, putting on all the colours, and it was like bringing me back to Croke Park, to that happy place. So you've reminded me of that, so fair play. Shane, last couple of questions. 4.5 years on now from the time you were in, you know, St. Patrick's as well. You've been to DCU, you've gotten a degree, you're back playing at the top level, you're hoping to play for the Dubs again and push for 5 in a row. So it's been an interesting 4.5 years, but you've been able to do some really productive stuff since then.
Absolutely, yeah, and as you said, I went back to DCU, I attended DCU and qualified in sports science just there back in November, graduated then, and 4 years ago I came back into the inter-county setup. And it's been a topsy-turvy kind of road for me, and it's something that I look forward to. It's in the face of adversity, I believe that, you know, you really become a stronger person, and, you know, my footballing career hasn't quite gone the way I've planned, but again, how I think now, I'm not going to look at it as a negative, I'm going to look at it as a positive. I've been in and out of the last few championship panels the last couple of seasons, and if and when Jim makes that phone call, I'll be more than happy to oblige and participate, and hopefully, as you say, 5 in a row, but we'll keep that to another day. So
a possible Dubs player has actually mentioned the words 5 in a row. That's very rare. So have you been able to picture the moment or try and think forward to the moment when and if, hopefully when, you're wearing that Dubs jersey again in Croker or in Parnell or wherever the game might be? Yeah, absolutely, and I think, as you referred to there earlier on about myself and Conor Pepper training very, very hard, I always have that in the difficult days that we have, sometimes 2 days, and training 9-10 times a week. In those days that you don't want to get up, I always refer to that hurt that, you know, from not being around and actually seeing the lads thankfully being so successful in the last number of years, that it's driving me on to make sure that I'm ready, and as I said, if and when that call comes, I'll be more than happy to accept it and hopefully play a part in their ever continuing success. He was going to say 5 in a row there, but he didn't. Last 2, Shane, you're still seeing people, you're still seeing specialists, you're still seeing psychologists to this day, but it's not as frequent now, and you know, you've spoken about your toolbox and the different bits that you need to try and help if you do feel down, but you are fully aware that you still do need some help at some times.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, it's less frequent now. When I first came out of the hospital, thankfully I was referred to a very, very good psychologist that, as you said, I still see today. It was more frequent at that time. It was maybe once, twice a week, and it's spaced out now to maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. And it's beginning to give me a bit more independence and that kind of eventual freedom that I'm striving for in years to come, whenever that may be. I'm not putting myself under pressure. I'm learning every day what works for me, what doesn't. There's still things that come into my world that I need to speak to my psychologist about, and I'm absolutely I'm comfortable with that. And as you said, it's something that is still in my life, and I'm willing to keep on going.
And if people want to read more or see more, I know you're doing some talks, and we'll pop up your social media details as well, your Instagram and your Twitter. Where can they find you?
At Instagram, S_Carthy_ and S_Carthy8 on Twitter. That I'll be sharing stuff that I will be doing over the next couple of months, and hopefully, as I has done already, strike a chord with someone in some shape or form. Now,
me and Shane are going to go for a nice walk around Hope. But very finally, the final quote of the blog. I know you might not remember every word for it, but will you paraphrase it for us and just the journey you've been on? It reads at the start, "I'm no longer surviving, I'm living," and the end is very powerful as well.
So I thought it was very poignant to finish off with saying that depression is something that I'll need to face every day, but I'm willing to keep up that fight, and the fire of life has been lit inside me, and I'm ready to go.
Great stuff, Shane Carthy. Thanks a million.
Appreciate it.